The crystal chandelier above her head scattered light like broken promises, and Rebecca felt every shard pierce through the careful armor she had built around her heart. She sat across from Marcus in the most expensive restaurant in the city, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the water glass, trying to ignore the weight of his stare. This was supposed to be the night everything changed, the night he would finally see her as more than just his colleague, more than the woman who had quietly loved him from the shadows of their shared office space for 3 endless years. But instead, 20 minutes into their dinner, he leaned forward with an expression she couldn't quite read and said the words that would shatter her world. "Rebecca, I need you to leave this restaurant with me right now." Her fork clattered against the porcelain plate, the sound echoing through the hushed dining room like a gunshot through silence. If you believe in the power of kindness, in the beauty of second chances, and in stories that remind us what truly matters in this world, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring more heartfelt stories to people who need them most. Rebecca's mind raced through 1,000 explanations, each one more painful than the last. Was he embarrassed to be seen with her? She had spent hours choosing the right dress, the deep blue one that her sister said made her eyes look like the ocean at twilight. She had practiced her smile in the mirror, rehearsed casual responses to questions he might ask, imagined this moment so many times that the fantasy had become more real than her own life. She worked as a senior analyst at the marketing firm where Marcus served as creative director, and while their professional relationship had always been marked by mutual respect and easy collaboration, she had never dared to hope for more until 2 weeks ago, when he had walked into her office with that boyish grin and asked if she would join him for dinner at Lumiere, the restaurant where reservations were made months in advance and where a single meal cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. Her throat tightened as she looked at him now, searching his face for answers. Marcus was the kind of man who turned heads without trying, with his warm brown eyes and the slight gray at his temples that made him look distinguished, rather than old. But it was his kindness that had captured her heart. The way he remembered everyone's birthday, how he stayed late to help junior staff with their presentations, the gentle way he spoke to the cleaning crew as if they were old friends. She had fallen in love with him slowly. The way autumn creeps in, one golden leaf at a time until suddenly the whole world is painted in colors that take your breath away. And now, in this moment with the soft piano music playing in the background and the scent of expensive wine hanging in the air, he was asking her to leave. The shame began to burn in her cheeks as she noticed other diners glancing in their direction. An elderly couple at the next table had paused their conversation, their curiosity barely concealed behind polite smiles. A waiter hovering near the kitchen door seemed to be waiting to see what would happen next. Rebecca felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that made her want to disappear. Perhaps she had misread everything. Perhaps this dinner was never meant to be what she had hoped it would be. Perhaps Marcus had invited her here only to let her down gently in a public place where she couldn't make a scene, couldn't let the tears fall freely, couldn't show him the depth of the love she had harbored like a secret garden in the quiet corners of her soul. But then Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, and the electricity of his touch sent shivers down her spine. His voice was urgent but soft, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Please, Rebecca, trust me. I know this seems crazy, but I need you to trust me right now." Something in his eyes made her nod, made her push back her chair despite every instinct screaming at her to demand an explanation. She grabbed her clutch purse with shaking hands, aware of the whispers that followed them as Marcus left several bills on the table, far more than their barely touched appetizers cost, and guided her toward the exit with his hand gently pressed against the small of her back. The October air hit her face like a splash of cold water as they stepped onto the sidewalk. And for a moment, Rebecca considered simply walking away, hailing a cab, going home to cry into her pillow and curse herself for being foolish enough to believe that someone like Marcus could ever see someone like her as anything more than pleasant company. But before she could move, Marcus had already started walking quickly down the street, glancing back at her with an expression that was equal parts determination and something that looked almost like fear. "This way," he said, and against all logic she followed. They walked for 3 blocks in silence, Rebecca's heels clicking against the pavement, her mind spinning with confusion and hurt. The city lights blurred through the moisture gathering in her eyes, and she blinked furiously, refusing to let the tears fall. Finally, they turned down a narrow alley that opened into a small park she had never noticed before, a hidden pocket of green in the concrete jungle, with a single bench beneath a sprawling oak tree whose leaves glowed gold in the streetlight. And there, sitting on that bench wrapped in a thin jacket that was clearly inadequate for the evening chill, was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with dark circles under her eyes and a sleeping infant clutched against her chest. Marcus approached slowly, carefully, the way you might approach a frightened animal. "Sarah," he said gently, and the young woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something between hope and terror. Rebecca stood frozen, watching as Marcus knelt down in front of the bench, his expensive suit pants touching the damp ground without hesitation. "I'm Marcus," he continued, his voice infinitely kind. "This is my friend Rebecca. We're here to help." The story tumbled out in fragments pieced together through the young woman's tears and Marcus's quiet questions. Sarah had been living in her car for 3 weeks after her boyfriend threw her out, when she refused to give up their baby for adoption. She had no family, no friends, nowhere to turn. She had been surviving on whatever she could find, trying desperately to keep her infant son warm and fed while searching for any kind of work that would take her without judgment. Earlier that day, she had been outside Lumiere, hoping that someone leaving the expensive restaurant might spare some change, when she had overheard Marcus making the reservation for tonight. In her desperation, she had somehow found the courage to approach him in the parking lot, to tell him her story in a rushed, humiliating confession that she was sure he would ignore like everyone else had. But Marcus hadn't ignored her. He had listened, had taken her number, had promised to help. And tonight, when he should have been enjoying a romantic dinner, when he should have been focused on the beautiful woman sitting across from him, he had remembered his promise to a stranger who had no one else in the world to turn to. He had left the restaurant because he had arranged for a representative from a women's shelter to meet them here, because he had personally called in favors from friends who ran a job placement program, because he had spent his own money to secure Sarah a temporary room in a safe boarding house until more permanent solutions could be arranged. Rebecca watched as the shelter representative arrived, a kind-faced woman named Maria who wrapped Sarah in a warm blanket and assured her that everything was going to be okay. She watched as Marcus handed Sarah an envelope that she suspected contained far more money than he could easily afford. She watched as he played gently with the baby's tiny fingers, making silly faces until even Sarah managed a tearful smile. And in that moment, standing in a cold park watching the man she loved sacrifice his own comfort and his own evening for someone who could give him nothing in return, Rebecca felt her heart crack open in a way that was both painful and beautiful, like a chrysalis splitting to release something that had always been meant to fly. When Sarah and Maria had left, when the park was quiet again except for the rustling of leaves overhead, Marcus turned to Rebecca with an apology already forming on his lips. But she stopped him, stepping closer and taking both of his hands in hers. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've been in love with you for 3 years. I've watched you be kind to everyone around you, but I always thought maybe it was just who you were at work, just a professional courtesy. But tonight you showed me who you really are. You gave up our dinner. You sacrificed what was supposed to be a special evening for someone who had nothing to offer you. And that, Marcus, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed." Marcus's eyes widened, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed genuinely speechless. "Rebecca," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion, "this dinner was never just a dinner for me. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you how I feel for longer than you know. I wanted everything to be perfect, and then when Sarah called me today, desperate and scared, I thought I had ruined everything. I thought you would think I was crazy, that you would never want to see me again." She laughed then, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "You don't understand," she said, tears streaming freely down her face now. "You didn't ruin anything. You showed me exactly who you are, and that's the man I've been hoping you would be. That's the man I've been dreaming about. Someone who sees beyond himself, who keeps his promises, who understands that kindness isn't something you perform for an audience, but something you live even when no one is watching." They stood there in the golden light filtering through the autumn leaves, two people who had been circling around each other for years, finally finding the courage to bridge the distance between them. When Marcus kissed her for the first time, it was tender and sweet and tasted of salt from her tears and hope from dreams finally realized. It wasn't the fancy restaurant with its crystal chandeliers and expensive wine. that would become the story they told their grandchildren someday. It was this moment in a small forgotten park, with their expensive clothes slightly rumpled and their hearts completely open, that would define the beginning of their love story. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that real love is found in moments of sacrifice and genuine kindness, please leave a like on this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Sometimes the most beautiful moments in life come when we're willing to give up what we want for what someone else needs. Your engagement helps us reach more people with stories that matter, stories that remind us of the goodness that still exists in this world. As they walked back toward the main street together, hands intertwined, Rebecca realized that she had been wrong about so many things. She had spent years believing that love would come with grand gestures and perfect timing, in fancy restaurants with carefully rehearsed words and flawless moments. But real love, she understood now, was messy and unpredictable and beautiful precisely because it prioritized humanity over perfection. It was choosing to help a frightened young mother, even when it meant sacrificing personal desires. It was seeing someone not for what they could offer you, but for who they truly were beneath all the pretense and fear. It was finding someone whose heart beat to the same rhythm of compassion that moved your own soul. Before we end, I want to ask you something special. If you believe that this kind of love still exists in our world, if you believe that there are people out there who choose kindness, even when it costs them something, please take a moment to comment below. Share a time when someone's unexpected act of compassion changed your perspective, or tell us what this story meant to you. Your words create a community of hope, and we read every single comment. 6 months later, Rebecca would stand in that same small park, now in the full bloom of spring, and watch Marcus play with Sarah's baby boy, while Sarah, now working and thriving in her own apartment with the help of the programs Marcus had connected her to, laughed at something Maria said. Rebecca would look at the man she loved, at the life they were building together that was rooted in something deeper than romance or passion, something built on the foundation of shared values and genuine goodness. And she would remember that night when he asked her to leave the fancy restaurant. The night that seemed like rejection but was actually the beginning of everything she had ever hoped to find. Love, she had learned, wasn't about the destination. It was about discovering someone who would walk away from perfection to choose humanity, who would sacrifice the small things to honor the big things, who understood that the measure of a person's heart was found not in what they did when the world was watching, but in what they chose when given the option to look away. Marcus had asked her to leave the restaurant, and in doing so, he had invited her into the kind of love that changes everything, the kind that doesn't just make you fall, but makes you fly.